Hello and welcome back to Think Outside the Board, everyone. This week's Kickstarter Weekly will cover games that are completing their funding from September 6th to the 12th. And we only have 2 games today. Then, after I cover those 2 games, I'll go on to talk about the games that I personally pledged from the last video. This week there happen to be 4. Games that I've acquired since the last video. This week there are none. And then 2 games that I have played. So let's kick things off and get started with our very first game and get through this video quickly. Doomtown Weird West Edition. The game is going to fund on September 8th. They started off with a minimum required funding goal of $19,000, and they're currently sitting at about $121,000, which is just shy of about 6.5 times their initial required funding goal. Now, Doomtown Weird West Edition is a game for 1 to 6 players. It says on Board Game Geek that games will play in about 30 plus minutes, but I hear games of this going, 2-3 plus hours. So I think that 30 plus minutes on BGG is just inaccurate. This is a heavy game, and I'm going to put the risk on this one at high. The reason why is the publishing entity that is behind this is their first published game. The original game that this comes from way back when was called Deadlands Doomtown. And that was a collectible card game, a CCG. And I think there are problems with CCGs. It's hard to get cards. You may not always have the same cards as other people. And the industry seems to have moved away from that in recent years, kind of changing CCGs into LCGs where, yes, there will be packs that you can go out and buy that will sort of add to your game and increase either the scenarios or the variability of your game. But the industry has seemed to step away from CCGs where you're getting a pack and you don't really know what is in it. And you're hoping for certain cards. And, that whole distribution system seems to reward people who just go out and buy a lot more packs, which is not something that everyone can do. So it becomes sort of unfair to people with less money. So anyway, this game was republished as Doomtown Reloaded as an expandable card game. And that was through AEG. We've reached a time where now rights have reverted. So the creators are now publishing their own version of the game. It's supposed to be fully compatible with the old AEG version. And in fact, you can get expansions that are new and older expansions through this campaign. So as I already mentioned, this is an expandable card game. It takes a lot of its mechanics from poker. In fact, players will actually be trying to construct poker hands in addition to other things that they'll be doing with those cards. And it's Wild West themed. Well, not only Wild West themed, but weird Wild West themed. So in addition to having gunfighters you can use and guns you can supply them, there are going to be sort of magical spells and things you can use as well. And then within all that, the game ultimately is a contest of area control. So this is designed by 2 designers. It's the same designers who've been behind the game all along. They are Dave Williams and Mark Wooten. Dave Williams has previously worked on the original Deadlands Doomtown, the remake Doomtown Reloaded, and Legend of the 5 Rings. And Mark Wooten has worked on Doomtown Reloaded, Thunderstone Advance, Towers of Ruin, and Thunderstone Quest. Now, unfortunately, the artists are just too many to name in this video. I have kind of a list of all of the artists for the first 2 games. There's 83 of them, and I'm not sure if all of those artists are being represented in the new game or if there are, some of them that are being used, maybe some new artists. It's just, they're not credited. And I think the reason is there's not sort of a main artist on this. There's not 1 or 2 or 3 artists who are kind of doing all the art. It seems much more a situation where they went out and they licensed individual art for different cards. And so there never really was a central artist or group of central artists on this game. It is just a hodgepodge of licensed art from 83 different artists that may be changing a little bit or may not with the publication of this version. And finally, it's published by Pinebox Entertainment, who are heavily working with Dave Williams and Mark Wooten. And this is the new updated version of the game now that the older license has expired with AEG. So let's talk about pledge levels on this. There are several pledge levels that are targeting retailers, print and play versions, or just a pledge manager, where you put in a very small minimum pledge and then later on you may hopefully upgrade your pledge. So I'm not going to cover any of those. I'm just going to cover physical copies of the game intended for individual buyers. Now, of those, we have 5 different pledge levels. The first pledge level is $60. It's called Greenhorn, and that's the pledge level where you're going to get the new version of Doomtown, the Weird West edition. The next level is for $120. It's called Full Playset, and at that level, you're essentially getting 2 copies of the base game. And the reason for that is, like something like Arkham Horror, the card game, you're going to be building your decks, and there may not be enough of certain cards in the base game that you could put those cards in every deck with a full set of players. So if you want to do that, you should get 2 copies of the base game for that $120 pledge. Now, once you go up to the $175 pledge level, it's called Playset Plus. You'll get, of course, those 2 copies of the base game, but you will also get a playmat and 6 sets of 60 sleeves. So 360 sleeves should be enough for everything in both base games. For $300, you can pledge the complete level, which will give you both base games, the playmat, and all those sleeves, but you will also get the 5 new expansions that are also being produced as a part of this campaign. Now, if that's still not enough, you can pledge the $500 level, which is called Old Timer. That will give you all of the stuff mentioned previously, plus all of the old AEG expansions, of which I've counted them up, and there appear to be 17. So that will give you 17 more of those smaller previous AEG expansions, which are going to be compatible with this new version. And finally, Pinebox is looking to deliver this game in May of 2022. I always give a little warning there because with everything that's happening in global shipping right now, there could be delays, but maybe there won't be, hopefully there won't be, and hopefully the industry will be starting to get back on track along with everything else in terms of global shipping by May, but we'll see. But that is the date that they're shooting for. Now, the other game on our currently funding list is Black Rose Wars Rebirth, and this game is going to complete its funding on September 9th. Now, they had a minimum required funding goal of $118,000, and they're currently sitting at $1.3 million, which is over 11 times that minimum required funding goal. Now, Black Rose Wars Rebirth is a game for 1 to 4 players. It should play in about 90 minutes. It's got a medium-heavy complexity, and I'm going to put the risk on this one at medium-high. And the reason for that is that while Ludus Magnus Studio is a bigger publisher, and they've published some very big games, they, for the most part, publish a lot of very big games with lots of miniatures. It's a little worrying kind of how pushed back the deliveries for them have gotten. And it's just something to be aware of that, at least as far as I'm concerned, stops them from graduating to a medium-low risk level. At least not until they get more of those Kickstarters that are kind of waiting in the wings fully delivered. This game is a deck building game that's also a miniatures skirmish game. And it's essentially a standalone sequel to the original Black Rose Wars game. That game right now has an 8.1 on BGG. Personally, I think that anything with maybe an 8 and above is a really, really solid game that you should not ignore. So it comes with good credentials kind of behind it. Now, despite the fact that the original was published fairly recently in 2019, you can't really get it anywhere right now except in the secondhand market. Before I started shooting this video, I even checked around, and you cannot even buy the original game through Ludus Magnus's website. So you can't even order it through the publisher right now. And it's also not being offered through this Kickstarter. So there is really no way, unless you're going to go through maybe eBay or, pay a marked up secondhand seller rate, there's no way to get Black Rose Wars right now at all, which potentially makes this game more appealing as it's your kind of only way to get a game of this type set in this universe. Now, the original game was designed by Marco Montanera. He is back for this game. The only game that he has designed is that previous Black Rose Wars game. But he's joined by Diego Fonseca, who has worked with Ludus Magnus Studios before. The only game that he has designed previously is Dungeonology: The Expedition. Now, there aren't actually any credited artists on the Board Game Geek page, but I've done a little work and tried to compile a list from the Kickstarter page. So I know that several of these artists I'm about to talk about are sculptors, and they've worked on past games with Ludus Magnus Studio, including the first Black Rose Wars. And then there are a couple other artists as well doing more of the illustrative art. So first up, we have Fernando Armentano. He is a sculptor. He has previously worked on Barbarians the Invasion, Black Rose Wars, and Village Attacks. Next up, we have Andrea Coletti, and this is their first published game. After that, we have another sculptor, Tomas Enchechi. And Tomas has previously worked on Black Rose Wars, Dungeonology the Expedition, and The Faceless. Giovanni Parada has previously worked on Black Rose Wars, Dungeonology the Expedition, and Sin Tempore. And finally, Paulo Sippo has previously worked on Black Rose Wars, Dungeonology the Expedition, and Nova Edis. Ludus Magnus Studios has previously produced such games as Black Rose Wars, Dungeonology the Expedition, and Sin Tempore. Now there's only one pledge level on this, so it makes it easy in some ways. You're either going to be pledging this level or you won't. It's for $153. It's called the Rebirth Pledge, and that will get you almost everything in this campaign. However, there are add-ons. Now there are no pledge levels for these add-ons, but there are add-ons where you can add these various items into your pledge, and that will include things like sleeves, a playmat, bowls, as in resource bowls, card holders, an art book, mini sleeves, and tournament sleeves. And I will mention a few of the add-ons, not those, but these are a few of the add-ons that are more sort of gameplay related. So there are 2 additional figures that you can add on. One is called Irene the Wanderer, and one is called Judas. These are miniatures with cards, so it's essentially giving you more playable characters in the game. They're about $12 each if you want to add those on. There's also an add-on called Secrets of the Lodge for $30, and that is a bundle with Irene the Wanderer and a novel, which I assume is featuring her, because otherwise why would they package the novel with her? But that's $30. You're going to get the novel. It's going to come with its own package, and it will include that book and Irene. So if you are buying that, you don't need to buy the Irene the Wanderer, statue miniature separately. You'll already be getting it through that $30 add-on. There's also an add-on for about $28 called Deadly Masks that features 2 additional miniatures. And there's a more expensive miniature called Gaia Reborn for $39. It's a bigger miniature, and it features a lot more cards, a lot more kind of things that you can do with the game. And Gaia is a character that they've been offering through most of their campaigns. Gaia is featured heavily in Nova Edis Renaissance, and in fact, if you buy this kind of larger expansion, you will be able to use Gaia in Novus Edis Renaissance as well. So it is an expansion that kind of has a dual purpose in 2 different games. And finally, Ludus Magnus Studios is aiming to deliver this Kickstarter in September of 2022. All right, so that completes that section, and now we're moving on to the 4 games that I personally pledged from the last video. The first of those is Arydia, The Paths We Dare Tread. I'm actually very excited about this game. It's by the designer of Xia Legends of a Drift system. It is a sort of fantasy exploration game, very kind of open world sandboxy. It reminds me of Gloomhaven in the size and scope of the game, both physically and just the scope of the game and its storytelling. And it's by a designer who has done some really good things in the past. So I'm very much looking forward to that one, but it's going to be a big game when it comes, and I'm hoping that we can eventually feature it on our Twitch channel. I also personally backed Flamecraft, which is maybe the first big Kickstarter from Cardboard Alchemy. And it features lots of really cute dragons, baking bread. It's kind of a contracts game, really great table presence, and the people behind the campaign just really know what they're doing. So I know that that's going to be a good game. Again, that's something I'm sure I'll be featuring eventually on the YouTube channel. I also backed Legend Academy, which I think looks pretty cool. It's by the team at Eldorado Games, and it features fairy tale and storybook characters that you are taking into an academy type situation where you're going to go on adventures in other characters' stories and storybooks. And it looks very, very neat. It also came at a time, though, when there are a lot of these kind of fairy tale and storybook character games out. There's one that's up right now called Three Tail that just canceled because I think right now the market's just kind of been oversaturated with these types of games, and Three Tail was on the tail end. However, I know the Three Tail people, are planning on relaunching in September. I don't know if that's a good thing, though, because I know September and October are going to get very glutted with a lot of bigger Kickstarters, so they may be jumping out of the frying pan and into the fire. But I did back Legend Academy. I also backed Legends of Galzyr, which is a very open world kind of storytelling game with cute animal meeples. It almost feels like maybe if you were to take some of the characters in the world of Everdell, but to take them from a card drafting, worker placement, set collection game and put them into this kind of open world, questy storytelling adventure game. So I think that looks really neat, and I also think that is a game that my fiance Kristen is personally really going to like. So hoping that one pays off, and I'm looking forward to playing it down the line. Now, as I mentioned at the top, there are no games that I acquired this period. Nothing has come in. That's just really basically because of what's been going on with worldwide shipping and all the delays and things. So I have many Kickstarters that just keep getting pushed back and pushed back and pushed back. So we've just hit a period now where I'm not getting a lot of things in right now, and that's good. I think I need to focus on clearing some space out first before I have more stuff coming in. So I'm very happy that gives me a little more time, but that also means that no acquired games this period. And finally, let's talk about the games that I've played. So first up is a game called Loot of Lima. It's a deduction game kind of in the vein of Clue, except instead of trying to figure out who did it, where, and with what, you're trying to find two different treasures that have been buried on a desert island by pirates. It's a pirate-themed game. And there are kind of player screens that you have in front of you where you can place tokens inside various circles. So you can track where the treasure is not buried as you ask deductive questions over the course of the game, and hopefully figure out, where the other players know the treasure is not buried. And if you do all that, in the end, you'll figure out where the treasure must be buried. I did not really like Loot of Lima. I like the idea of deduction games, but this one, it had some design flaws that just didn't really work for me or either of the two people that I played it with. They give you multiple systems in the game to sort of track your deductions. One is on that player screen. They also give you a player sheet, and the player sheet has several different sections. So one of those sections is kind of like the player sheets in Clue, where you're going to be filling off and making check marks in a grid and just trying to figure out, where the treasures are by process of elimination. They also give you spaces underneath that where you can track every question you ask. So you'll say something like, I'm asking Marie about the space of land between the southwest and the southeast, some two directions. And then you're either going to be asking them about specific terrain types, so either forest, beach, or mountain, or a more general any type of terrain. And then they will tell you how many tokens that they have in that area that indicates that they know places where the treasure is not. And ultimately, I think you don't need all three of those tracking systems. In fact, I think if you were to use any two, you'll be good. So it's this weird situation where it alternately gives the players, I think, too much to work with, which can make it confusing. I know when I played the game, I chose two of those systems, and I actually won the game. And another player chose different systems, and, well, that player, I think, was confused anyway, so they did not win the game. But I think having these kind of multiple systems and giving players the option of which of them to use is kind of a mixed bag. I think most players, at least in their first game, are going to think that they really need to use all three. And that can just lead to a lot of confusion. Also, the game does feel very multiplayer solitaire, which is weird because you're asking these questions all the time of the other players. But nevertheless, it feels like you're having your own experience. And I don't know, the game just in total to me was not a rewarding gaming experience. It did not feel that fun. Now, if someone else asked me if I wanted to play the game with them and they really wanted to play it, I wouldn't turn them down. But I would never ask to play the game. And I think for me, I don't know exactly where I would rate the game, but I think it's probably somewhere like in the 5s. So not that high. Just kind of in that area where I'm like, I mildly dislike this game, but not enough to not play it or put my foot down if I'm with people who want to play it. But it's not a game that I would ever recommend to people or try to get people to play. And I think there are other better deduction games out there. In fact, I think Clue may even be a better deduction game. But I do like the theming of Lima, and I really wish it had worked and worked better than it does. Now, I've also played a game called Shasn, and I've played it a couple times. I'm actually also in the process of recording a first impressions video for it. And in fact, that video is going to jump the line in my production schedule. I'll talk a little bit more about that after this when I get to the what's coming section. But I have played Shasn twice, and that game is also a mixed bag. But I think it's going to really depend on different players' likes, whether or not they're going to like the game. Now, if you want a thorough evaluation of it, just be looking for my first impressions video, which should hit sometime this weekend. But I will say this as I'm talking about it here. It is a game about politics, about elections, but it is not a political game. So at the start of everyone's turn, they're going to answer a question, and it's a yes or no question. And there are sort of 4 different basic ideologues in the game. There's a capitalist who's associated with the resource money. There is the showstopper, who's supposed to be an ideologue who kind of traffics in media, which is their resource. There's the idealist, who their resource is trust. And then there is the Supremo, who's kind of a dictator type character, and their resource is called clout. Now, in general, when you answer any one of these questions, there'll be a yes or no answer. Each of those things will be affiliated with one of these ideologues, and generally you will get the 2 resources that match that ideologue, depending on how you answer the question, along with another, random resource that's printed on the card. So you'll be answering a question at the start of every turn. You will get 3 resources, and then you'll be able to take your turn. And from there, the game is basically an area control game. Players will be able to, using those resources, buy voter influence cards, which will give them voters they can then place out on the board. They will also be able to buy conspiracy cards for resources, which will give them different kinds of powers that they can use in the game. Sometimes it's a one-off ability, sometimes it's an ongoing ability, different things like that. And then in each region is an area that's supposed to thematically be a volatile voting area. So whenever a player places a voter into one of those spaces, at the end of their turn, they will draw and resolve a headline card. And about 2/3 of those cards are negative, 1/3 are positive. So players are kind of taking a risk when they place there and then have to evaluate that headline card. Now, the reason that they may do that, though, is that voters that are placed in that volatile area cannot be gerrymandered. And gerrymandering is a big part of this game, and as it's an area control game, it's crucial. So whenever you have the most voters in an area, you can do 1 gerrymandering action per turn related to that area, where you're either moving a voter in or out of that area or between 2 adjacent areas. And that, in essence, is the game. Now, it feels a little bit like a party game because people are asking these questions at the beginning of every turn, and they are questions that spark conversation. However, as you get later into this game and you acquire more and more cards, so every turn you're going to be getting more and more cards and putting them under your player board. Every time you get 2 types of 1 color card, that will generate 1 resource of that color every future turn for you. So like if you have 6 red cards, you could be getting 3 red resources every turn. Also, anytime you get 3 cards in 1 color and 1 ideologue, that will activate the 3-card power, which generally allows you to do things that kind of mess with the game. And also at 5 cards of a type, you have a very powerful power that usually allows you to remove voters or majorities in some part from the game. And that's very powerful. Once a player gets 5 cards, they're going to be able to start doing real game-breaking things and going into areas where players had established majorities that cannot be affected by gerrymandering, but can be destroyed by these 5-level powers. So once players get to a higher level of the game, there is a lot going on in terms of decision-making and resources and kind of destructive powers. And I think that really precludes it from being sort of a party game or a game that you want to be drinking during. So it weirdly kind of straddled this line between party game, political game, and just, kind of area control game that's almost very abstract. It's strange. It's a game that is both an abstract and then has this political theme to it. So it has a theming and it's abstract at the same time. It's a very weird and compelling kind of mishmash in genres, and it's also produced out of India. So the art on it is very cool, and just the design sense behind it as well, I think, is very unique. But it is a game that I think gamers are going to either love or hate. Gamers may not like the kind of bare bones area control abstract element of it. They may not like the simplicity of it. They may not like the question asking at the beginning of the game that will get you resources, but there's always some question as to what those resources may be. And you're not going to be answering those questions in terms of how you personally would answer them. Although I think I've seen players start to do that more and more as the game goes on. They kind of forget about the strategy and just start answering honestly. But what you want to be doing is not answering these questions for you, but answer them in the voice of the ideologue who you think would answer it a certain way to try to get those resources and those cards. So there are some interesting strategic choices going on there. And I think more than that, just watch my first impressions video. It'll be coming out within a day or two, and I'll talk about it more there. Right now, I'm still waffling on the score that I'm going to give it, but it's probably going to be somewhere in the 6s or 7s, I would imagine. So let's quickly talk about what's coming for the channel. So you're watching this, and by the time you watch this, I will have already filmed the Shasn First Impressions video and my Game of the Month video for July. Now, both of those videos should also be appearing over the weekend. This weekend, I plan to shoot videos for Embarcadero and Kemet Blood and Sand. They've kind of been bumped in the production schedule a little bit just so that I can get Shasn done and I can get that July Game of the Month video completed. And then the following week, you will most likely see videos for Import Export, and then maybe either Hadrian's Wall or Stronghold Undead. And of course, another weekly update video. And then 2 weeks following this, you'll get another weekly update video, and you'll get the August Game of the Month video. And then 2 weeks following that, once we hit the very beginning of October, I'll be doing my September Game of the Month video. And from then on, you should see those Game of the Month videos hit within the first few days of each month. So I will be caught up, but it'll mean that you'll get one Game of the Month video from me this weekend, and one in 2 weeks, and then another one 2 weeks following. So be watching for all of those videos and that content coming. If you haven't yet liked this video or subscribed to this channel, please consider doing that. Have a great weekend, get lots of good gaming in, and I will see you soon in my next video. Take care.